The loudspeaker at the Cedar Grove bus station announced the night departure. But then, a punch, like a sledgehammer, shattered the air, ripping through the moment and silencing every sound. James Tucker, 76, collapsed onto the concrete. His cap, emblazoned with Quezon Veteran, rolled into a shadowed corner, where the streetlight made it gleam like a flicker of war-torn memory. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, dotting his worn coat with dark, quiet defiance. Vance, leader of the gang, black hoodie, red dragon tattoo, smirked coldly. He had just hit James for accidentally brushing past him. 3 of his thugs laughed loud and cruelly, howling like wolves. "Watch where you're going, old man," Vance snarled. James, hair silver, disheveled, lifted his gaze. There was no fear, only patience, like a man waiting for something or someone. The crowd stood silent, eyes darted away. No one moved. No one spoke. Who would rise for this old soldier? What secret burned behind those unbroken eyes? Be ready. Justice is coming, and it will be more explosive than you expect. In just 15 minutes, a storm will hit Cedar Grove, and this quiet station will never be the same. What will you do when dignity is trampled? James Tucker collapsed onto the freezing concrete, his 76-year-old body crushed beneath the weight of a punch that came without warning. Pain surged through his left shoulder, the same place where shrapnel from Quezon in 1968 once embedded deep into bone. His worn, thick jacket slowly soaked with the blood seeping from the corner of his mouth, staining a dark red streak across the olive-green fabric. On his chest, a small Quezon 1968 badge caught the glow of the streetlight. It shimmered, like a memory jolted awake, a fragment of time once proud, now stained in a forgotten bus station. The man standing above him was a walking threat. Black hoodie pulled tight over his head, a red dragon tattoo stretched from his neck down one bare arm. Vance's face was expressionless, but his eyes burned with a twisted fire. He didn't speak at first. He simply nudged James's cap with his foot, sending it rolling farther away until it stopped beneath a flickering lamppost. The words Quezon Veteran spun slowly under the dim light, as if daring anyone to look. "This place isn't for the washed up," Vance said, his voice cold as a verdict, then burst out laughing. Behind him, 3 others, shadowy figures glued to his back, laughed along, sharp and harsh. One hurled an empty soda can to the pavement. The sound sliced through the air like a blade. James said nothing. He moved slowly, inching forward. His thin, scarred hands, shaking, searched through the broken shadows. Each movement seemed to pull the past pain back from the depths of his bones, but his eyes never wavered. They stayed locked, steady, burning, like the look he once held, waiting for enemy fire to fade in the jungles of Vietnam. He reached the cap. His hand paused on the frayed fabric, traced the silver thread, and held it close, like a soldier clinging to his flag in the middle of battle. Around him, the Cedar Grove bus station felt like a silent stage. Witnesses stood by, but no one stepped into the scene. A young woman clutched her purse to her chest, eyes darting, desperate not to be pulled into this brutal play. The ticket clerk bowed his head, knuckles white around his ledger, as if hoping silence might erase him from the moment. A bus driver starting his shift glanced over, briefly, then turned away, climbing into his cabin like fleeing from something too heavy to confront. No one laughed, no one spoke, but no one stood up. The station, once filled with the noise of horns, shouts, and the sharp scent of diesel, now held only the echo of collective cowardice, shattered by the mockery in Vance's laughter. James remained still. No retaliation, no clenched fists. He breathed calmly, then slowly reached into the pocket of his coat. His trembling fingers touched cold metal. An old wartime field transmitter. Outdated. Obsolete. But still on him. Always. His final oath. Never call for help unless it's truly needed. And now, he needed it. He pressed the signal 3 times, short, then long. The tiny screen lit up. SOS, Cedar Grove Station. Then it blinked off. It wasn't just a distress call. It was a message to the one person he trusted beyond all others, Emma Tucker, his only daughter, a captain in the U.S. Army, stationed less than 20 miles away. She didn't know what had happened, but she would come. James didn't doubt it. He lifted his head. His eyes scanned the far end of the road. The amber streetlights stretched long shadows. The station looked like a dim-lit stage where every eye had turned away from the man on the floor. But James wasn't waiting for any of them. He was waiting for a fire, and he knew it was coming. His body ached, but his heart was iron. This wasn't the first time he'd been knocked down. But this time, he wasn't fighting for foreign soil or tactical ground. He was fighting for dignity, for the silent soldiers who no longer spoke, for the belief that the righteous must never stay silent too long. Vance and his crew still laughed, but the sound had begun to ring hollow, as if James's unshakable stillness unsettled them. In those few seconds, they no longer looked like predators, just overgrown boys pretending to be fierce in the dark. A gust of wind blew through the station, sending torn tickets fluttering, dead leaves skimming across the floor, and the air shifted. No one knew that in 10 minutes, Cedar Grove would no longer be a place people passed through without remembering. No one knew a reckoning was coming, and that the silver-haired man kneeling on the ground was about to become the eye of the storm. But James knew he didn't need a watch. He didn't need comfort, just a signal, and a gaze that refused to fall. Now the question remained, who would rise, and who would walk away, as if nothing had happened? The answer was on its way, riding in the low hum of an engine far in the distance, the sound of truth drawing closer. Under the dim yellow glow of the street lamp, Cedar Grove bus station became a shadowed stage, a place where the audience never clapped, where old heroes stood alone in the spotlight, and no one stepped forward to defend them. The night wind blew gently, but it couldn't chase away the chill settling in the hearts of those who stayed silent. James Tucker sat on the freezing pavement, his curved spine now upright, held by sheer will. In his hand was the worn baseball cap embroidered with the words, Quezon Veteran, the very one that had followed him through the nameless years of a war most had chosen to forget. James's eyes never left the cap. In that moment, he was no longer sitting in a modern-day bus terminal. He was back in the jungles of Quezon, 1968. Rain fell like lashes. Bullets zipped through the trees like a swarm of locusts. He remembered the feel of a friend's helmet strap clenched in his fist, dragging wounded men through mud and thorns, blood mixing with rainwater, breath lost beneath the sound of gunfire. And then, Vance stepped forward. He knew nothing of war. He couldn't grasp the weight James once carried when he was still unborn. The gang leader, with the red dragon tattoo crawling across his neck, reached for the caisson 1968 badge on James's chest. Without pause, he ripped it off and tossed it to the ground like a child's broken toy. Then, with the full weight of his arrogance, he stomped on it. "Where'd you buy this, old man?" He laughed, his voice thick, like an old scar buried deep inside men who never knew anything beyond fake power. More cans clattered. Vance's crew, dark shapes clinging close, kept throwing them at James as if it were a ritual execution. Every metallic thud echoed through the night like a drumbeat of humiliation, striking not just James's body, but the core of what he once represented. Sacrifice. Still, James didn't retaliate. No curses, no pleading eyes. He simply bent down and picked up the cap. His hand brushed gently over the frayed fabric. His eyes never shifted. To an outsider, it was a small act. But inside James, it was a sacred one. It was the way he pieced memory back together. Memories of leading men through fire, of hearing names screamed through the jungle, of knowing life and death were often separated by a single breath. Cedar Grove knew James only as a quiet old man, someone who read the paper every morning at the corner cafe, someone who bought bread and always said thank you to the young cashier. No one asked about the scars along his arm. No one looked closely enough to see the lines on his face, etched like a war map carved by time. His house sat humbly on a corner, with no medals hanging, no flags, no trumpet fanfare. Just an old wooden box, inside of which lay a black and white photo of 10 young soldiers, standing shoulder to shoulder, staring ahead. 8 of them never made it home. And today, that quiet peace had been broken. Not by gunfire, but by a smug punch and a society that said nothing. Vance didn't know that. He didn't see beyond the aged frame and steady eyes. To him, James was easy prey, an out-of-place relic in a world he believed he owned. But when the old field transmitter in James's coat pocket quietly buzzed to life, everything began to change. A soft beep echoed in his palm. The signal had gone through. SOS, Cedar Grove Station, confirmed. Recipient, Emma Tucker. Somewhere beyond the state highway, a military Hummer veered off course. Behind the wheel, Captain Emma Tucker, his daughter, a soldier in her own right, trained to respond without hesitation. She didn't ask why. She read the coordinates, gripped the wheel, and pressed harder on the gas. And back in Cedar Grove, no one knew that moment had already been set in motion. Only James, still seated within a circle of mockery, still calm, still silent. He could feel something coming, not in Vance's eyes, but in the air itself. In the vibrations only a man who had once waited for artillery in the jungle could sense. Vance, still drunk on dominance, stepped past James, not realizing every footfall brought him closer to the edge of a storm. The crowd still stood, frozen. No one dared intervene, but none of them knew that the storm of justice was coming, fast as a blade, silent as truth, and impossible to avoid. James smiled slightly, not from pain, not from humiliation, but because he knew. Justice has never needed to shout to exist. It only needs to arrive at the right moment. And now, that moment was almost here. At Fort Campbell, just 20 miles from Cedar Grove, the night was ripped open by the harsh white glow of the tactical operations room. In a sealed space filled with the soft beeping of electronics and real-time digital maps, Captain Emma Tucker, 38, felt a jolt like lightning strike her chest. On the screen in front of her, a military code she knew by heart flashed across in bright red. SOS, Cedar Grove Station. It was a signal from the only person who could override every protocol in her life. Her father. Without a second's hesitation, Emma turned sharply, her voice slicing through the room. "Bravo team! Mount up! Hummer deployment! Now!" Chairs scraped back. Boots hit the floor with practiced precision. Weapons were checked in fluid, lightning-fast movements, as if everyone in the room had rehearsed this scenario 100 times. 6 military personnel, dressed in tactical gear, sprang into action. No one asked why. They didn't need to. They only needed to know who was in danger and who had given the order. In less than 5 minutes, 2 Hummers roared to life, their diesel engines thundering like a storm across concrete. Emma climbed into the passenger seat, uniform sharp, eyes steely, but her heart pounding. In the pocket over her chest was an old photo. James Tucker, smiling gently beneath his K-San veteran cap, standing in the backyard garden. He had never needed medals or parades, but he had taught her how to live like a soldier, through quiet strength, through dignity. She remembered the nights they sat on the porch, under soft yellow light falling across a worn wooden table. James never spoke of Khe-san with bravado. He spoke of it like one might talk about rain or soil. But in his eyes she always saw something unextinguishable, a calm forged in fire. "Hold on, Dad," Emma whispered, her hand gripping the photo against her chest. And the lead Hummer veered from base, slicing into the night like an arrow carrying justice. Back at Cedar Grove Station, the air was still, dense like stone. James Tucker leaned against a cold metal bench, his cap resting in his hand, the blood at his lip now drying. He no longer had the strength to rise, but his eyes had not dimmed. His frame was small, hunched in the harsh patchwork of concrete and light, but his spirit stood tall, like a pillar in a storm. Vance was still laughing, kicking empty cans toward him like a cruel game. He stood before the silent crowd, basking in his illusion of control, not realizing that he was merely a fleeting moment in a much larger storm already on its way. "You're done, old man," Vance growled, strutting in a slow circle, playing king in a kingdom of silence. The crowd remained still. The young woman clutching her purse still hadn't left. Her eyes flickered between fear and something new. Guilt. The ticket clerk, hands shaking, finally did something. He typed out a short message on his phone, hit send. Regret swirled in his eyes, as if he'd just traded away a piece of his conscience. The bus driver sat frozen in his cabin, staring into the rearview mirror. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. Something was changing. No more laughter, no more cans clattering on concrete. Only a vibration. Faint at first, like someone tapping on steel, then stronger, heavier, like drums rising from the earth. No one saw it, but James knew. That was the sound of Hummers, not just vehicles, but the heartbeat of justice drawing near. Vance didn't hear it. He lacked the experience to feel the shift in the wind, but James did. He lifted his head, his eyes catching the first glow of white lights breaking through the end of the road. 1 beam, 2, 3. Headlights pierced the night, slicing through dust and silence like blades, and suddenly, Cedar Grove was no longer a place of darkness. It had become a stage for justice, and justice was arriving with the discipline of a trained unit that never shows up late. Inside the Hummer, Emma gripped the handle tight, eyes locked through the windshield. She saw him. Her father, small but unbroken, and a town frozen, awaiting judgment. Vance began to turn. The white lights hit his face, and the smirk vanished. Engines roared, tires screeched across the pavement, and for the first time that night, every eye turned to James. And James, he simply smiled, not out of pride, not out of triumph, but because he knew he was no longer fighting alone. 3 Hummers surged into Cedar Grove Station like steel-tipped arrows cutting through the night. Dust exploded behind them. Tires tore across the concrete as diesel engines thundered like war drums. The station seemed to hold its breath. In a blink, the sound of bus horns and night wind vanished, replaced by a force that had just arrived. A unit bearing no banners, but carrying the full weight of authority, and the unflinching reply of justice. The door of the lead Hummer swung open. Emma Tucker stepped out first. Her tactical uniform was still marked with dust from base, but her stance did not waver. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Only her eyes moved, sharp as drawn steel, scanning the crowd, slicing into the souls of everyone watching. Vance froze. He didn't fall, but the smirk he wore like armor evaporated. He had never seen anything like this. Not city police, not security guards. This was something else. A disciplined force. Professional. Purposeful. Prepared. Emma never took her eyes off him. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't look at the ticket clerk. She hadn't even looked at her father. Not yet. She looked only at Vance, the man who had trampled the honor of someone who once carried an entire squad on his back through the fires of Khe-Sanh. Form up! One short command, but it hit the ground like a hammer. 6 soldiers exited the vehicles in unison, every movement crisp, cold, rehearsed. They didn't need backstory. They didn't need motive. All they needed to know was this: who needed protection, and who had picked the wrong target. They spread into a line, weapons low, no barrels raised, but every eye in that formation spoke one thing: don't test us. Within the arc of silence, James Tucker slowly stood. No one helped him. He didn't ask. He said nothing. He simply held the cap in his hand, the one that had been stomped on. Now, it rested in his grasp like a living metal, and in the glow of the Hummer's white lights, his eyes shone with something only men who've walked through hell carry. Emma stepped forward. She had led dozens of missions, countless operations, but never had her steps felt so unsteady. And yet, when her hand landed on her father's shoulder, it was as solid as stone. His eyes met hers, just like years ago, when she fell off her bike and didn't cry, and he simply nodded. 2 generations, 2 soldiers. 1 moment. Back at Fort Campbell, just minutes earlier, when the SOS alert flashed, Emma hadn't hesitated. No briefing, no permission slips, just one order: go. Because the man who sent it wasn't just anyone. He was the one who dragged 10 young men through enemy fire, his back pierced with bullets, his blood soaking jungle leaves, and never once complained. And she knew he would never send that signal unless something was truly wrong. Vance took another step back. His eyes scanned the crowd, looking for support, for laughter. But no one laughed. The city fell silent. The town stood still. Cedar Grove was changing. He cleared his throat, a fake chuckle. cracking in his throat. Just messing around, he muttered. His voice faded before it reached anyone. Emma stepped closer, now face to face. Her voice was quiet, not loud, not angry, just impossibly firm. My father was a hero before you were even born. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an insult. It was simply the truth. And sometimes, truth is what arrogant men fear most. The military ring closed tighter. No guns raised, but the pressure in the air was heavier than concrete, crushing all of Vance's swagger into a small, shrinking thing with nowhere to hide. The crowd began to shift, from apathy to silence, from silence to curiosity, from curiosity to respect. The girl with the handbag no longer clutched it to her chest. She pulled out her phone, as if to capture the moment justice stepped off the screen and stood in the real world. The ticket clerk stood upright, still holding his phone, but now looking directly at James, not with pity, but with the eyes of someone witnessing the return of faith. Emma turned back to look at her father. James nodded, just once. It was the kind of nod only fathers give, the kind that doesn't say thank you and doesn't need to, and the kind of nod only daughters understand because between them, justice isn't a performance. It's something you live, something you protect, and something you answer. Cedar Grove would never be the same. Tonight, a small town witnessed something a nation sometimes forgets. That courage, quiet, unshakable, is a fire that can never be extinguished. The night wind swept through Cedar Grove Station like the final breath of darkness before dawn. The headlights from the Hummers still cast long streaks of light across the pavement, like history freshly written across cold concrete. Emma Tucker, her uniform sharp, silver insignia gleaming like a vow of honor, stepped forward, facing Vance, the man who once believed power was built on fear and laughter. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply spoke, her voice low but clear, cutting through the air like a blade on tempered steel. My father saved 10 men at Quezon, while no one dared to move, knowing one bullet was enough to die. The words sliced through the silence. No murmurs, no engines, just stillness, listening, and absorbing. Vance lowered his head. No one told him to, but Emma's gaze and the quiet, unwavering presence of James behind her pressed his spine into a slow, inevitable bow. The arrogance in his eyes was replaced by panic. He was no longer a leader, just a man who had realized he'd stood on the wrong side of history. Emma's team still stood around them, shoulders squared, badges glinting against their chests. No words were needed. Their presence alone was enough to make Cedar Grove, for the first time in years, feel truly safe, not because of weapons, but because someone had finally stood for what was right. James stepped forward, slowly, but steady. He stood tall, cap in hand, eyes turned toward the crowd. He didn't need a microphone. He didn't need a stage. With a voice low and rough, yet unshaken, he began to speak. Of Quezon, of jungles thick with gunpowder and smoke, of red mud and flying bullets, of one February afternoon in 1968 when he pulled 10 brothers through enemy fire, hands bloodied, but never letting go. I didn't save them because I wasn't afraid to die, James said, his gaze drifting as if seeing their young faces again. I saved them because I couldn't leave anyone behind. And then, something remarkable happened. A single pair of hands clapped, slow, solitary, from the right side of the station. The bus driver, then another, and another. Soon the entire station awoke from its long slumber of indifference. The applause grew, louder, stronger, rising with emotion. The woman who once clutched her purse was now in tears, gripping the strap as if holding herself together. The ticket clerk, once bowed, once afraid, now stood straight, raising a hand to his brow in a military salute. His eyes shimmered, no longer with fear, but pride. Vance didn't lift his head. When the town police finally arrived, he didn't resist. No one cuffed him. He didn't have to be. He walked as if already judged, not by law, but by conscience. He didn't look at James. He didn't look at Emma. He just lowered his head, walking through a corridor of witnesses, each step like a silent apology. By morning, the sun rose soft and forgiving, as if Cedar Grove had finally shed its dust and weariness. At the station, beside the bench where James once sat, a new bronze plaque had been installed. In honor of James Tucker, Quezon veteran, 1968. A soldier, a father, an unyielding symbol. Locals paused to read it. A child tugged at his father's sleeve and asked, "What's Quezon?" And instead of checking his phone, the father knelt down and answered in a voice hushed with reverence. A week later, a letter appeared in the small mailbox outside James's home. The envelope was crumpled, unsigned. Inside, the handwriting shook and stumbled, but every word was sincere. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't know who you were. Now I do. I've signed up to volunteer at the Veterans Center. I never knew what honor meant. I want to learn. Vance." James folded the letter. He said nothing, just nodded, his eyes drifting to the horizon. No longer a battlefield, but still full of trials. He knew Cedar Grove had awakened, not through banners, not through speeches, but through one action, standing up when what was right was pushed to the ground. That evening he sat again on his porch, beneath the same warm yellow porch light. Emma sat beside him. She didn't speak. She simply placed her hand gently on his. And that was enough, because sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs one person who refuses to fall. And a community brave enough to rise and follow. James Tucker, the old soldier, was finally seen, not just for what he did, but for a dignity that had never left him. James walked away from the bus station, his Quezon veteran cap tilted slightly under the morning sun, but his story was only just beginning. Across America, veterans, men and women of quiet courage and unwavering dignity, still walk among us, not asking for applause, only waiting for the day someone will finally listen, finally honor them. Who will be next? A fearless female veteran in Arizona? A retired firefighter in Michigan? Every story is a spark, a flame that lights up the values of honor, sacrifice, and loyalty. If James's story moved you, type 1 in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. New York, Dallas, Seattle, and help us share this story with your family, your friends, your neighbors, so that all across this country we remember, heroes don't need a stage. They only need to be seen. Your support helps us keep telling real stories, where justice rises and courage is given the respect it deserves. And don't look away, because what's coming next might surprise you. A veteran standing up to a gang in a city park, or a battlefield secret waiting to be revealed. Stay with us, because men like James are still writing history, quietly, but never silently.